Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Strategic Policy and Resources Committee on Wednesday, the 12th of June. Do we have any apologies for this morning?
Apologies from Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rona Brock substituting for him.
Thank you.
Apologies, convener from Councillor McCall with Councillor Waters substituting.
Thank you. Sorry, apologies, I'll begin again. Are there any declarations of interest? We have none. We move to the minutes, the minute of the SP&R Committee of the 17th of April. I'm happy to move the minute. Are there any questions? No. The minute of the Executive Subcommittee of the SP&R Committee of the 20th of March for noting. Can we agree? Minute of the Property Subcommittee of the 18th February for noting. Can we agree? Minute of the Appeals Subcommittee of the 18th of March for noting. Can we agree? The minute of the Appeals Subcommittee of the 2nd of May for noting. Can we agree? The minute of the Employees Joint Consultative Committee of the 28th of February for noting. Agreed. Minute of the Perth Kinross Integration Joint Board of the 15th of February 19 for noting. Can we agree? We move on to item 4 this morning, which is the Town Centre Fund. And I will introduce, or Mr. Valentine will introduce.
Thank you, Convener. Members, you will be aware that the Scottish Government announced a new ring-fenced £50 million Town Centre Fund in December of last year. In March, we received a letter awarding us £1.983 million from that fund. This figure was based on our overall population and the number of towns with a population of over 1,000. The aim of the grant is to enable local authorities to stimulate and support place-based economic investments, which will encourage town centres to diversify and flourish. 6 specific aims were identified: town centre living, vibrant local economies, enterprising communities, accessible public services, digital towns, and proactive planning. The Scottish Government have since confirmed that the funding can also be used for third-party capital expenditure and to enhance existing projects as well as new projects. The expectation is that we will have a plan for spending the additional grant by November this year. The report before you today outlines the process we have developed since the funding was announced back in March. A workshop was held to which all elected members were invited on the 25th of March. This provided an opportunity for elected members to discuss priorities and feed in suggestions for projects to be considered. A wide-ranging list of potential projects was discussed at the workshop, and a total of 30 were noted at the meeting. Officers collated these into the table attached to the report and considered them against the 5 criteria which we agreed at the workshop: deliverability of the project, how the project met the aims of the fund, the costs and benefits of the project, any future revenue impact, and any previous capital investment in that location. Following review by officers and further discussions with members, 4 specific projects are recommended to be further developed and funding to be allocated to them as outlined in the report. It is important to note that all of the projects proposed have either been developed or have been led by local community groups. The team and I are happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Are there any questions? Councillor Dugan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Convener. It's very positive paper, very positive developments for key areas across Perth and Kinross, in particular reference to Crieff. I know that there's fairly exacting time constraints on the drawdown of the monies, and the ambitions that we've got with the use of these monies for CREEF are particularly both exciting and challenging. And I just wanted reassurance from officers that residents of CREEF and Strathearn more broadly will see the benefits of this investment very quickly. Can we get that assurance, please?
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Dugan. As regards the CREEF investment, we're working with a variety of providers, a variety of partners. So our ambition is that we get the project up and running. The community are absolutely behind the project, and we hope through working closely with the partners, we'll manage to achieve their aims and objectives.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. It's not just specifically on CREEF, but in relation to the three other projects in Gubrangus, Kinross and Pitlochry. It's 1.5 and November is only 4 to 5 months away, and time is going to be critical here. So it states there has to be a plan in place by November. Is that early or late November? And that's actually quite important because potential of an extra month. But even more important, it is expected that work will be completed or at least work or contracts signed or commenced within 2019-2020. What I'd like to ask there is, providing there is in place a coherent and a plan by November, actual work would not necessarily have to start until, let us say, the spring of next year.
Thank you, Councillor
Just to get
Donaldson.
clarification on
Yeah,
it.
just my understanding, the second bit, it does state that contracts have to be signed, but I'll leave Mr. Valentine to.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Yes, contracts have to be signed, but that contract could include entering a contract with a third party, etc. As regards the definition of November, I think the definition we would want would be the end of November. I don't know if Mr. Mackenzie has anything to add as regards the specific definition of November.
Thanks very much. It's my understanding, Councillor Donaldson, that the resources can be carried forward into the next financial year, which I think is the crux of your question. So the money can be carried forward if necessary.
So basically the guidance has been loosened somewhat. We've got a bit more flexibility than appeared at the beginning. Thanks.
Thank you, Convener. Regarding the indicative costs that have been allocated to each of the projects, and the short time to really define these costs, can I get some feedback on the once a contract is signed, that will firm up exactly the cost for each of the projects, and in that time in between, firming up the firm cost for each of the projects, is there manoeuvrability one way or another to increase or reduce funding with each of the projects as these costs are firmed up?
Mr. Valentine.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Waters. As regards the projects are at an early stage with the development with some of the partners. These are estimates, but these are the amount that you have committed to give to these partners. So this isn't indicative of perhaps the entire cost of the project, but this is the contribution that the council would be agreeing to make.
Councillor Lane. Oh.
If the contract was to come in under the indicative price, what happens to the surplus? Can it be allocated elsewhere, or can it be held? Does it have to be returned, or can it be held in the next financial year for something else?
Thank you, Councillor Lane. I would expect that if it comes in under, then the money would come back to the council and be for the council to decide how that money would be spent, but in accordance with the criteria within the Town Centre Fund.
That would still be able to fit in with the prescribed time scale.
Obviously, Councillor Lang, it would help if we had an early indication of those to be a problem, but yeah, we would need to work within the timescale that we've got, but as Mr Mackenzie said, there is some flexibility on that now.
Sorry, if you can just supplement it. And do we have a sort of substitute small project that would be next in line if there was, say, £50,000? Or I know it's difficult, but did we have anything?
We could go back to the long list, which, as we said, was the 30 projects, but obviously would require to have a discussion with elected members about that.
Yeah, there are 25 other options available for us to refer to that were discussed at the elected members workshop. We welcome the additional funding provided by the Scottish Government to support our town centres. This will allow us to accelerate and bring forward a number of very positive projects for our communities. I would like to thank all elected members who participated in the workshop on the 25th of March, which helped us to develop a long list of potential projects. These have been further refined, and the projects recommended for approval and further development represent a very much needed and welcome investment in some of our towns. These projects will be progressed with the community groups behind them, demonstrating our commitment to co-produce with our communities solutions and investments in our communities. The 4 projects recommended are a mix of schemes which have been in development for some time, and as such are the Drummond Arms and Crieff, and the proposals for the community cycling hubs in Couperangus, to the more recent proposals to refurbish and enhance car parking at Loch Leven and improve linkages from the Loch to the town centre. Finally, there is a project to develop additional event space in Pitlochry. I am sure all of these projects will make significant difference to the economies of these towns, creating additional vibrancy, investment and opportunities for both community and business activities. Therefore, I'm happy to move the paper and ask the committee to approve that the Town Centre Fund monies be allocated to the 4 projects identified within the report. Can I have a seconder, please?
Thank you, Convener. I'm delighted to be able to second the report today. I think it's very welcome that this money has been made available to the Council to invest in town centre regeneration. I think the projects that have been brought forward following extensive consultation with elected members and members of the wider community are exciting and in some cases long overdue. And I think what's particularly interesting about the range of projects is that some of them are substantial capital projects, some of them will offer communities the, particularly, for example, I'm conscious of the community and cycling hub events, projects in my own ward in Couperangus, where communities will be able to leverage in external money to maximise the investment that the Council is making today. And I'm very happy to second the paper.
Thank you. Are there any amendments? No. Can I ask for comments? Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much, Convener. I think it's entirely right that we concentrate on a limited number of slightly larger projects with this funding. I do think, though, that it might be worthwhile having a reserve project stood by and decided on at this stage in case there's money coming available, rather than leaving that until that money might come available, accepting that if it's a reserve it may not get funded. It's also very gratifying to note that by my calculations per head of population on this occasion, Perth Kinross is the 4th best funded local authority in Scotland, and I think we should be gratified for being in that position. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Parrott. 2 points really. One, I'm happy to take on your suggestion about looking for an extra project, but equally I would anticipate officers having some flexibility where if one project was slightly over budget and another slightly under budget, we could use some budget flexibility there as well. Councillor Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I, like your Vice Convener, I'm very grateful for this substantial, really very substantial investment in Perth and Kinross, well, all local authorities across Scotland by the Scottish Government. It's transformative in its scale, and that was the ambition that they had, and I believe that through very cooperative working actually in Perth and Kinross Council, we've managed to make sure that the ambition of the Scottish Government with this investment has been reflected with our plans that were taken forward here in Perth and Kinross. Further to Councillor Parrott's and Councillor Lang's inquiries about a kind of sub-B list of things that might catch remaining money, I think that is prudent, but I think your assurance over budget flexibility is also sensible. I think officers had to work very quickly, and there was a very tight timescale attached to this money, and I believe that the way in which local elected members' reflections of ambitions from within our different communities was convened was quite innovative and quite helpful, and whilst lots of the ideas were very wide of the mark, there was certainly no bad ideas, and it enabled officers to come up with the short list that we see today, which are all outstanding ideas, and where the door wasn't slammed either on those ideas when they were first refined down to the very shortest of lists. And I'm grateful, and I know that elected members from within the SNP are grateful of the flexibility that was shown in the run-up to this committee to ensure that we didn't miss an opportunity to deliver for our communities. And finally, convener, the short timescales that were attached to this, I know that we all raised an eyebrow about that at the time, but with hindsight, I believe actually that we've all got, it's allowed us to deliver something very ambitious with very short timescales, and I think our communities across Perth and Kinross will appreciate the urgent and responsive delivery of these projects in that short timescale. So in actual fact, I think that's probably quite a good thing.
Good. Thank you very much for your positive comments. Councillor Lane.
Oh, I didn't have my hand up, but thanks for the... I always take the opportunity. I always take the opportunity to speak.
You may have been scratching something.
Yeah, probably. I was glad to see that my suggestion about having a substitute is sort of going to be fleshed out. I think it's fantastic to have this extra money from the Scottish Government, and I think it will be transformative. I think the approach taken by Perth and Kinross Council is sensible, rather than dividing it up into smaller amounts and not making a scattergun approach that wouldn't really make any great difference to any community. I think concentrating the fire on these 4 projects, which across the whole council and all political groups, I think everybody's got behind these 4, and I look forward to seeing the transformatory effect that they have on it. So I just like everybody work well together, and I'm glad that we're here today to sign it off.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. I'd just like to add my endorsement to the recommendations of the report. I think the projects not only provide a geographic balance to towns in the north, south, east and west of Perth and Kinross, but also meet a broad range of the key themes whilst delivering projects that will have a real and visible impact in Kinross, Pitlochry, Crieff and Cooper-Angus. I think the initial funding and spend criteria set by the Scottish Government were challenging, not to spend anything before November, but to complete the works within the financial year. It was going to be a challenge, and I think we all appreciate the added flexibility that has been allowed for works to commence or contracts to be signed within the this financial year. I believe that the 4 projects recommended are deserving, they have merit, and they're the right projects to pursue, and the ones which will have the biggest impact for residents and visitors to those 4 towns.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Convener, as you know, I'm not often one to compliment the Scottish Government, but in this case I have to welcome the additional extra money that they've given to Perth and Kinross and indeed to other councils across the country. This comes on the back of the money this administration set aside for pretty much the same purpose, and delighted to see that where Perth and Kinross administration go, the Scottish Government are happy to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank all members for their cooperative approach to progressing this paper as quickly as possible, so that we can actually get to state where we can sign contracts before the end of the financial year. Final comment, Councillor Donaldson.
I certainly do compliment the Scottish Government. I think it's a fund that's going to be of clear benefit to communities, the length and breadth of Scotland, in particular given the ongoing problems in the retail sector. As Councillor Parrott pointed out, also Perth and Kinross has done well in this fund. I think our population share in Scotland is 3.4%, and we've basically taken almost exactly 4% of the total fund. So that is also good news. Just going to conclude by saying, obviously, as a member for Strathern, I'm very pleased that we may make progress on the Drummond Arms. I think it's a question of, is there political will? Well, I think the very fact, Councillor McCall, I'm glad to see Councillor Brock here, and the three of us as ward councillors are quite simply united on this. Is there community will? I believe there is, without any doubt. I think maybe 5–10 years ago, people almost gave it up as a lost cause. I think now what we have, and there's going to be a number of obstacles to overcome, but it is the fact that it is now a clear possibility, and our role is to turn that into a probability and then into clear reality. So I think there is now at last some hope. Thank you.
Final comment, Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just in particular like to welcome the proposals that are on the table for linking better links between Kinross Town Centre and the Lochleven Pier. I think for those of you who have been there will know that it's for what we want to be a significant tourist destination and somewhere that lots of people would like to visit, going through what is essentially a residential area with not fantastic signage and not great route to get there is not ideal at the moment. So we obviously want to improve links between the town centre and the pier and back to bring people who come and visit Lochleven to shop and use some of the businesses in the local area. I'd just like to thank Councillor Waters for bringing this to our attention, the work that has already been undertaken by SNH and other local partners. It's good to see that all 4 ward councillors are on board with this. I think that I would certainly see this, and I think my colleagues would agree that this is almost the first phase of a project here. We've always been quite supportive, as have some of our predecessors, of a visitor centre in Kinrossshire that would tell the history of the local area, including the imprisonment of Mary Queen of Scots, and talk about some of the natural environment around there. So once we get the car park in there and get that first phase done with the support of the local community going forward, I hope that we might in future then be able to look at progressing the visitor centre project as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, I'd just like to reiterate and thank all elected members for their contributions to this and for their assistance in the speedy progress that we've had in bringing this paper to committee. Move on to item 5, and I'd ask Councillor Barrett to introduce.
Thanks, Convener. I was actually going to ask Director Barbara Rainton to introduce the report and then move it following questions on that. Barbara.
Okay. As part of the local development plan, all of the associated adopted supplementary guidance is required to be reviewed and publicly consulted on prior to re-adoption. This review process provides an opportunity to make clarifications to improve the application of the guidance. It has also permitted the most up-to-date construction costs to be reflected in the contributions. Due to any changes to the developer contribution and affordable housing guidance having financial implications, this report has been presented to the committee for consideration prior to the period of public consultation. The changes to the guidance take account of the outcomes of the legal challenge to the Aberdeen City and Shire Transport Infrastructure Fund, which resulted in Perth and Kinross Council taking external legal advice on the current guidance. The current guidance was found to be robust, but a number of minor changes were identified in order to improve this position. This report details these main changes, which have been made in line with the requirements of national guidance and the emergency local plan policy. It also links to the work of the Scrutiny Committee and has been to the Planning Member Officer Working Group. The period of public and stakeholder consultation will begin in September and will provide an opportunity for all interested parties to support or object to the proposed changes. The outcome of the public consultation will inform any further changes to the guidance and will be presented to a future committee prior to adoption. In looking at a final review of the documentation as well, we've discovered a couple of minor amendments which we want to bring to the attention of the committee this morning. The first is on page 91 and refers to paragraph 3.7, where it currently says to the conveners of Development Management Committee. I think the wording should be brought into line with the previous paragraph where it talks about the conveners of relevant committees. And there is a figure on page 96 in paragraph 4.2 where there is a slight mismatch between the figures, and both figures should read 19,126. Thank you.
Barbara, could you just repeat that 19,126 figure and whereabout that should be, please?
Thank you. It's page 96 in the box in paragraph 4.2 where it says cost per pupil is 19,126, and then the fourth bullet point down where it says 23,923 and the multiplication sum there, that 23,923 should read 19,126, and my apologies for that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor Lane.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Yeah, I welcome this report and some of the changes that have come through the Scrutiny Committee. Unfortunately, there's quite a few other points there that were raised at scrutiny that may not have been addressed, but we'll have a chance to feed into that as when the consultation goes out. The question I have relates to bank foot now being included in the higher rate for the infrastructure charge. And I was wondering the justification of bank foot being included, is it related to the Cross-Tay Road link and just its proximity to it? Because I would think Blairgowrie isn't in it, but there'd be a lot more usage from people in Blairgowrie using the Cross-Tay Road link than people in Bankfoot.
Who's best to... Peter, if you could clarify the methodology for drawing the map.
First of all, I should say that the changes to the contribution areas were generated by the comments we got back from the expert legal opinion that we sought. And it suggested that we had a far closer correlation between the potential impact from a particular development and the actual contribution. So this necessitated a much more detailed look at the various settlements around Perth and looking at the traffic modelling and whether or what was the percentage of journeys that are likely to come from a development in that area. And we set thresholds for that. The previous guidance had a slightly simpler approach of a sort of circle round Perth defining the area. Now, when we analysed the impact of development out with the Perth housing catchment area, it was fairly minimal and was more. Now, you're quite correct. There will be more cars come from Blairgowrie into Perth than probably come from Bankfoot. But it's the percentage of journeys from new development that is the critical factor. And I don't have in front of me the figures from Blairgowrie, but it will be lower than Bankfoot and other similar settlements in the area.
Yeah. Do you want a supplementary, Councillor Lane?
Please. But if we're using the Cross-Tay Road link, I'd suggest as one of the major costs, I would say that the percentage of usage of that from people from Bankfoot will be quite low compared with the percentage from Blairgowrie or anywhere on that side of the road.
What I would say though is the developer contributions are applied to new development. So it's only the impact of new development that you take account of in that. If you look at the costs of the Cross-Tay Link Road, the whole package in the order of 180 million, there's only about 50% of that is attributable to new development over the next 30 years rather than the development that's already there. So the bulk of the impact on the Cross Tay Link Road, you know, from areas like Blairgowrie is already impact on the Perth area.
Are there any other questions?
I'll have to meet with Mr. Marshall because it's not making any sense to me at all at the moment, the methodology of the usage of the new houses built to use this new bridge. I can't see anybody building a house in Bankfoot that will hardly ever use that bridge because you come into Perth straight down.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate that it can be, or it appears to be a complicated matter, and I'm sure that your further discussions with Mr. Marshall on the methodology and the legal rationale behind it will hopefully clarify your queries, Councillor Ling. Councillor Parrott, are you wishing to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Vice Convener. I think most of my concern about the transport infrastructure boundaries was actually answered by Mr. Marshall. So I think I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. Clearly a major thrust of this report relates to affordable housing. And I immediately think of Comrie with 11 houses built over the last 5-6 years and 110 on the waiting list. However, it's not on that I want to ask. It's on page 69, 2.9. It's maybe my misunderstanding, but it really does jump out at me, the figure of our retail. The contribution per square metre in 2016 is £123. In 2018, the contribution per square metre is £154, and that's an increase of 25%. Yet, you know, at the same time, we've got these major problems on commercial property and on rents. We're seeing just now, for instance, the whole problem with Arcadia. So it's just, how do we arrive at that figure? And you would assume, might be wrong, that that's going to fall going forward.
Peter, are you able to respond to? Thank you.
Sorry, the figures there are based on traffic modelling. So these are the actual impact or predicted impact of a retail development and then the predicted impact of a residential development, other categories of development. So you can't change these figures. What you can do is take account of economic viability in determining what the final contribution would be from that development. So there is the opportunity within the guidance to look at economic viability and reduce contributions. And you know, I think we would have to take that into account depending on the type of retail development it was. For example, a major supermarket with very good viability as a business operation, you would not expect to have a reduction in contributions. Maybe the subdivision of a current retail use in the town centre or the creation of small units in the town centre would be dubious financial viability, and you may look to reduce or have zero contributions. That would be a decision based on the viability statement and one for the committee to make ultimately.
I think it's also extremely important that developers assess viability from the outside, and particularly with regard to the purchase price of properties, so that they're not having to come to the council to argue that their development would be unviable because of the original price paid. So, did you want to follow up, Councillor Donaldson?
No, just to thank Peter Marshall, and quite clearly the figures shown here, and it did jump out at one, is the full rate, and there's quite a lot of flexibility below that level, and that's clarified things for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No. I'll move the report which provides an overview of the key modifications and clarifications to the current adopted developer contributions and affordable housing supplementary guidance. This is required to be updated in line with the Local Development Plan 2 and provides an opportunity to undertake a review of the guidance and make clarifications to improve consistency in its application. The report provides an overview of the main modifications proposed to the guidance, which have been considered by the Executive Officer team and the Planning Member Officer Working Group. The key changes are that residential buildings will be considered to be in use where council tax has been paid in the 7-year period prior to submission of a planning application. Non-residential buildings will be considered to be in use where non-domestic rates have been paid in the 12 months prior to submission of a planning application. Greater guidance on the requirements where a viability statement is required. An updated methodology for projecting which schools will have a capacity constraint and which will have contributions applied within their catchments. A modified position on the application of guidance to single bedroom dwelling house extensions. The revised primary education contribution level, the revised transport infrastructure contribution levels, and was discussed previously, the revised transport infrastructure boundary. The report recommends that these changes are approved by this committee with the drafting amendments detailed by the Director, and these are for public consultation, and that the outcome of that consultation is reported back to this committee. Can we agree the recommendations of the report? Good. Councillor Dugan.
Yeah, thanks, Vice Convener. I think from some of the questions that we've had from the committee, there's definitely areas of significant interest from members of this committee, but there's undoubtedly significant interest, not just from the public and from commerce in Perth and Kinross, but the wider elected member body of the council. And so I didn't want to frame it as a question, but I'll make it a suggestion that officers look very seriously about having a development session, if one isn't already planned, but a development session which is more of a back and forward, and that it's well advertised, as they usually are, to be fair, that officer, because this is complex and there's modelling involved, but there's very, very important issues in this, not the least of which is the tension between making sure that infrastructure is paid for by everybody who will benefit from it, and not putting a brake on investment and development. And we as a local authority, all 40 of us elected members, need to make sure we're playing our part in making sure that that balance, or we assist officers in making sure that balance is struck well. So I look forward to information on a development session being forthcoming if it's not already planned. And just finally, again, I didn't really want to make it a question, but it would be interesting to know at some stage after committee or recommendation 3 in the report, there's no time scale for that, and I think that would be helpful to have one so we know where we stand. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Councillor Dugan. I'm sure that at least one development session is perfectly in order. There may well be opportunities to have more in order to provide some interim feedback in terms of the consultation as well. And I think we'd be happy to discuss with members the best ways of carrying that out. So, Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much. We live in a very litigious age, and I'm delighted to see our response, if you like, to the legal case that was raised in Aberdeen City and Shire, and our proactivity in responding to that. And I hope that we've put ourselves with these measures in a very good place to robustly resist any legal challenge to our own systems. Thank you.
I hope so too. Thank you, Councillor Parrott. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I just wanted to put forward my thanks to everybody who's worked on this document. I think it's a very sensible list of suggestions based on the information that we've been given. I'm looking forward to the public consultation stage, and I think a power of work has been done, and I just wanted to raise my thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Can we agree the report? Good, thank you.
Now ask Councillor Stewart to take items 6 and 7.
Thank you, Convener. Item 6 is the authority to write off debts and obsolete stock, and I'll ask Mr Mackenzie, our Head of Finance, to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and good morning, councillors. In preparing the Council's unaudited accounts for 2018-19, adjustments required to be made for the write-off of debt with the Council's statutory debt recovery processes have been exhausted. Section 2 of the report and the attached appendices set out by income type the proposed write-off amounts to be reflected in the accounts, and the reasons for non-recovery. Overall, the level of write-off is broadly similar to last year. However, for council tax, for non-domestic rates income, and for housing rents, the specific amounts proposed to be written off are lower than in 2017-18. Section 2.4 in Appendix 5 to the report provides an analysis of and recommendations on the write-off of housing service charges, much of which is now prescribed. The committee is assured that every effort is taken to recover income due to the council, wherever possible, in accordance with the council's statutory powers. When further information becomes available, debt to be written back on and recovery action pursued where economic to do so. Whilst the report is by necessity drafted in terms of amounts proposed for write-off, a recurring feature of this and predecessor reports is a consistently high proportion of budgeted income the council collects, reflecting services' ongoing engagement with local taxpayers, tenants and customers. Taking one example, based upon the latest figures published by the Scottish Government, only Orkney Islands had a higher in-year collection level for council tax than Perth Kinross in 2017-18, with provisional collection levels for both council tax and non-domestic rates in 2018-19, marginally up on last year. Happy to take questions, Vice Convener.
Thank you, Mr Mackenzie. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor Dugan.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thank you, Mr Mackenzie, for the update. I think we have long enjoyed and should never take it for granted the collection rates that we enjoy in Perth and Kinross. Doesn't just happen. And we should take some considerable encouragement from that. Paragraph 2.3 on page 127 details the situation with rent collections on HRA properties, and it details that as slightly lower in 18-19 than it was the previous year. Can I ask, is that figure for in-year rents, or does that figure include rent arrears? And if it doesn't include rent arrears, then what would the figure be were it to do so?
I can confirm that it's in-year house arrears, and we don't have the information about cross years, but we can provide that.
Thank you, Director Renton. Are there any other questions on the report? No? Okay. This annual report seeks the committee's approval to write off both debt and obsolete stock from the 2018-19 financial year. Although Council endeavours to collect all debt due to it, and as noted we have a good record in doing so, there are inevitably occasions when this isn't possible. On a like-for-like basis, the levels of write-off, as Mr Mackenzie said, are broadly similar to last year's, reflecting the ongoing work undertaken by services to maximise income collection. Mr Mackenzie provided an overview of on the contents of the report. Going forward, we would also like to assure elected members that alternative methods of collection and recovery are being investigated at every opportunity in order to keep future write-offs to a minimum. Councillors should also be aware that whenever new or additional information received by the Council allows us to recover the debt, then, as Mr Mackenzie said, the charges will be reinstated and collected. I'm happy to move the paper. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Convener. Are there any comments on the paper? Councillor Shars.
Just to follow on from Councillor Dugan's comments, I think we really should pay tribute to the staff in this council who consistently deliver these results, and having had cause to work with a constituent on arrears that they had with the council, I think the very human approach that our staff take to people who are often in very difficult circumstances is definitely to be applauded, and often stuff that we don't see. So it would go wrong not to comment appropriately.
Thank you, Councillor Shars. I trust Mr Mackenzie and Director Renton will pass those comments back to the staff in the relevant departments. Are there any other comments? Can we agree the report? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 7 on the agenda is the procurement update for 2018-19. I think I'm going to ask the Deputy Chief Executive. No? I'm going to ask Mary Mitchell from the procurement team to introduce the report.
Thank you. The report presented to you today proposes arrangements for continuing to move our work with third-party suppliers forward in the coming year and presents a summary of the work concluded in the previous financial year. This report comes before committee to ensure that Perth Kinross Council meets the statutory duties set out in the Procurement Reform Act, which include revising our procurement strategy annually and reporting on the previous financial year within 4 months of our year end. During the most recent financial year, we have grown the percentage of our expenditure that is concluded in collaboration with other public bodies. That's from 18% to 44%. That makes us more efficient and quicker to the market in concluding our contracts. This has been achieved while continuing to work with substantial numbers of local organisations. We're now able to put an exact figure on that. At the moment, we're working with 473 Perth Kinross businesses. 87% of our £240 million spent last year was spent with an SME as well. So those figures are both rising. We still have more to do though. What we're working on in the coming year is being a more efficient place for suppliers to transact, and we will develop our digital tools over that time to cut the cost of doing business with the council. We also need to develop our approaches to working with social enterprises and supported businesses to ensure that as we spend, we have the greatest possible positive social impact. Already contracting with businesses, we are increasing the social value through using community benefit clauses in our contracts. And all of the above measures are ways in which effective procurement can contribute to the wider economic and social objectives we have for the area, and we will continue to build our capacity to make a positive difference with our third-party spend.
Thank you, Ms Mitchell. Are there any questions? Councillor Lang and then Councillor Donaldson.
Thanks. I was looking, obviously it comes up later in the paper in the transformation and about procurement moving forward and building ambition. And I see there's some issues with some of the timescales, etc. Mary, could you just elaborate on what these are?
So in my introduction, I mentioned there's more to do around the digital capability around procurement. So some of the issues that are highlighted in the transformation in the next paper are around, I suppose, building that into our transformation programme, working with our colleagues in IT to build that capacity. That has been more challenging, I suppose, than we thought when we started the transformation project. I think because there's a lot of digital transformation going on at the same time, so it's being in the queue for that work, really.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. I'd like to ask about the publication of contract awards. And the rule, as far as I understand, is any contracts awarded over 50,000 have to be publicised on the website, Public Contracts Scotland, by within 30 days. Now, this is something that came up in Audit Committee, both at the end of last year and in January. And we found out of a sample of 5, it's a small sample, 2 were deficient. 1, the contract had not been published for 15 weeks, had a value of 108,000. Another of 85,000 had not been published for a full 28 weeks. Now, I just simply want to ask, are the controls and processes now in place so we won't get a recurrence?
The controls and processes that are in place are that we have a monthly report shared with services around every outstanding contract award notice. So that comes out on the first Monday of every month. That's electronically generated and is shared with services at that point. In each service there is an individual, an officer who takes the role of sharing that with the officers who are involved in that contract publication and make sure that that comes back through the service. The procurement team do chase that if it hasn't come through over a period of time. The 30 days is our requirement for everything above 50,000. So we're doing what we can to make sure that doesn't recur.
So just to ask, was the original problem due to insufficiently goods systems, or was it a lack of training, or a bit of both?
My own personal opinion is perhaps a lack of awareness on a couple of individuals, from a couple of individuals about the statutory need for that publication. So there certainly is part of the new training we put in place after the audit report includes contract award procedures, including the need to publish. And that's a fairly new requirement, came into effect just a couple of years ago, so it has taken a bit of time for people to become aware of that change.
Can I thank you for that answer? And it is important that we are transparent, and I think you've allayed any concerns I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Some of the thresholds that are currently in place are derived from EU regulation. Are we aware of any proposed changes to those levels in the future? Thank you.
Ms. Mitchell.
We aren't aware of just how many changes to European legislation will impact as yet. The only thing that has actually been announced is that our requirement to publish in the European Journal will change at such time as we come out of the European Union, and we were required to publish in a UK-wide platform, electronic platform, instead of the European Journal. That's the only thing that we have been given definite notification about since the issue of withdrawal from the EU has become apparent.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Oh, Councillor Dugan.
Thanks, Vice Convener. It's page 160 of the report. Well, I have an easier question first, actually, Vice Convener. The Tayside Procurement Consortium, who is the lead authority in Tayside for that?
Mrs. Mitchell.
There's an equal split of agreement between the three councils involved in Tayside, Angus, Dundee and ourselves. There's a minute of agreement in place between the three councils. We share the costs equally. The employing authority is Dundee City Council for the 4 individuals that are employed, but they all have access to all 3 council systems, work equally across the 3 councils.
Okay, thank you for that.
More difficult question, Councillor Dugan?
I'm sorry, Vice Convener?
The more difficult question.
The more
that
difficult
was the easy
question,
one.
yes. It's not that much more difficult. It's page 160 and it's to the right of the little map, and we see, and I'm sure are heartened by, 111 Perth and Kinross based businesses were awarded work, and below that, equally importantly, 138 businesses in the Tayside area were awarded new contractual work. It's a slightly different thing, and I'm wondering if that's an important distinction, that in Perth and Kinross it's awarded work, in Tayside it's awarded new contractual work.
No importance to that distinction.
Right,
just those. This is a summary of the new contracts awarded during the financial year. So I think that's just a kind of inconsistency in the wording we've chosen there.
Okay, and just finally, Vice Convener, below that again is the community benefits, which usually attach to larger type contracts, and I know as many of us in here will be aware of some outstanding community engagement by larger employers, whether they're building roads or schools or things like that. But can I ask what assurance we can get from Mrs. Mitchell that that this is always rigorously tested in terms of, you know, because that is not window dressing. That is always the very positive stuff that we have seen as local members engaging with young people and similar things like that.
So the inclusion in the large contracts is very structured in terms of the numbers of local jobs we're looking for, the percentage of expenditure that we ask the contractors to make in the local area, so how much of their own sourcing they do locally. Your question was about window dressing, rather that, so...
Yeah, it's really what assurance we can get to allay the fear or the perception that some of it is little more than window dressing. I have to say that's not my experience, but I know that that is a concern that people have, that people know what to do and say in order to tick that box on the tender.
Okay. So your question is really around what's written in the tender document coming through in reality?
really what's your experience over recent years in Perth and Kinross?
Yeah. So what's in the tender document in most cases, certainly in the large contracts, is contractually binding. So through our contract management processes, we are ensuring that is delivered and is monitored as part of the contract review meetings on those large contracts. One of the things, and I think many of you are aware of this, one of the things that we were noticing in some of the smaller contracts where an offer was made to us but there was no contractual commitment as part of that offer, we weren't always able to find a place to put that offer, if you like. So what we've done in the last year is developed a procedure where community groups can engage with us and tell us what would be useful to be delivered, so that we can make a direct connection between what community groups say they would like to happen locally while a contract's taking place in their area and what the contractor offers, so that we can make a direct link between what businesses do in the community and what communities want them to do.
Thank you. Are there any Councillor Shard?
Just following up on your point, Mrs Mitchell, about the community groups, and I know some work was done via the action partnerships. I remember seeing some emails that went to the one that I sit on. Are there plans to expand on use of the action partnerships, because I know they're always looking for new outlets, and also in the highlights on page 162, I think it is, the tender for youth services, which I was involved in attending the event with the Ganachie Trust, and that was an amazing piece of work that was carried out. I think sort of guiding people through the mire of what could be quite a scary process if you haven't been through it before, and I just wondered if that's a model that anywhere else in Scotland is now looking at developing, or are we still very much at the forefront of that?
Ms Mitchell.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind comments about youth services. There was a lot of us involved in that work, a lot of Ms Devlin's team as well, and I'm not aware of that necessarily being replicated elsewhere, but certainly we have shared information on it with other councils who've shown an interest. In terms of the first part of your comment around local action partnerships and community benefits, there are actually plans to, we have someone coming to speak to the next Chairs and Leads meeting for local action partnerships, so that each chair will have the information about what we're doing around community benefits with community groups, so that there's more potential to spread the word, so that community groups can engage more fully.
No more questions? Okay. So the report seeks committee's approval for the procurement annual report for the financial year 2018-19 and a revision to the procurement strategy for delivery in 2019-2020. The report includes a summary of external expenditure committed by the Council under both the procurement legislative regime and the local code for following the public pound. Both data sets are linked to the report, and committee is asked to note the information provided. Annual reporting on procurement is now statutory duty on all public bodies with an expenditure greater than £5 million per annum. The change arises from the Procurement Reform Act and is intended to increase transparency of public spending. To that end, Perth Kinross Council now publish a plan which includes all sourcing activity which will take place in coming months, as well as a register of all current contracts. Having this information in the public domain helps to inform potential suppliers, and I know that there's an ongoing programme of events to engage local suppliers, helps to inform potential suppliers of the opportunities arising from spending decisions the Council's made. And by including targets in large contracts for local employment and sourcing, our approach continues to support strong, inclusive growth in the area. I'm happy to move the paper. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Are there any comments on the report? No. Can we agree the report? Thank you very much, committee. Convener.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Stewart. Move on to item 8, the Transformation Programme 2015-20, and ask Mr Valentine to introduce.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. This report gives an update on Phase 4 of the Transformation Programme, with reports on the 14 current live projects as at the end of April 2019. It gives an overview of the progress to date and identifies those on target and those with issues and risks, which have been managed by project boards and reported as appropriate to the SMTs and the Strategic Investment and Improvement Board, which replaced the Corporate Transformation Board. As you're aware, we have updated this report, and this revised version was only sent to you yesterday. I apologise for this administrative error, but we wanted to make sure that the elected members received the most current information available, which was discussed at the Modernising Governance Member Officer Working Group on Monday. We would be happy to take any questions with regard to this report.
Thank you, Mr Valentine. Any questions for Mr Valentine? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Convener. Just the project status on most of the projects running through is very good, apart from the central production unit. Again, can I just ask for an update on where we are with the central production? I notice all the highlighters are still at risk, which is the only project that sits in that category. Is there any update on this and how we're going to take this forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. There was a meeting on Monday of the Member Officer Working Group, and it was discussed at that point. But I'll let Mr Valentine give you a further update.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. The intention is that we bring a report back to September's Council on the central production unit.
Councillor Lane.
So, my understanding it would be a broader paper brought forward to the council, and that may have various options rather than be on just solely on and that's what I understood the paper that was going to come to the MOG was, until I read that the purpose of the paper that came to the MOG was to provide supporting evidence for a CPU in Dundee. I thought that the paper that came to the MOG was to discuss all options.
One, can I ask Councillor Waters to switch off his microphone? Sorry. Thank you. And two, as we are all aware, the MOG is to provide an open and frank forum for discussion. And the paper regarding the CPU was brought to the MOG, and I can confirm that an open and frank discussion was had at that point, but it's not, in my understanding, this is not an opportunity to reflect that discussion here in this committee. Supplementary.
I wasn't bringing up what was discussed at the MOG. I was bringing up what the part that the paper was was solely on the CPU. The paper coming to in September was on the CPU. I thought it was a broader paper than that.
Mr Valentine.
Sorry, Councillor Lane, I think you're right. I think what we said we'd bring in September is a paper on the future of school meals provision. I apologise.
Thank you.
Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Convener. I note this is phase 4 of the transformation programme. Can you say anything about, if you like, the future strategic direction of transformation going forward in the coming years? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Valentine. Sorry. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott. What we intend to do is to look at all the projects within the transformation plan. Transformation plans, in my view, shouldn't be set aside. They actually become our business. So change is inevitable. So what we need to think about is how we actually weave that through in the context of the Perth and Kinross offer and the local outcome improvement plan into our day-to-day business.
Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I'm on Appendix 2, page 231, and it's the top item regarding IT changes. And given that IT technology moves on faster than any organisation of our size can make changes, do we bear that in mind? Do we think about how technology will move when we set out on a path to make changes like the one that's identified at the top of that page? Hope that question makes sense. I'll clarify if it doesn't for Jim.
Mr Valentine.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Yes, through a mixture of our own internal experts and those that we're commissioning, we're trying to keep right at the forefront of technology. It is a difficult task, but we're also trying to look forward into the future, and the conversion to Microsoft 365 gives us considerable potential and hopefully a bit of stability in our IT architecture at this point in time.
Supplementary.
Thank you. Just a very quick supplementary. And how is the migration to 365 coming along?
We have started the migration to 365. I'll send you a copy of the timescale to show where we're working towards.
Councillor Duggan.
Thank you, Convener. And it's on the building ambition on the page 230, use of council's assets to generate income. I wonder, Convener, if either you or the Chief Executive would comment on my view that this toe in the water of income generation and becoming a more entrepreneurial council doesn't go far enough, really, and that either in terms of its ambition or in terms of its pace. And over and above that, we're not doing very well at it, and you and I both know some of the challenges that officers have faced with that. But do you share my view that we actually need to have a look at this particular measure and ambition again, and come up with something that is much more ambitious, but also much more deliverable?
Executive.
Councillor Duggan, thank you. And yes, I would share your view that this has proven to be very difficult in terms of being able to attract commercial advertising and sponsorship. So it does need to be re-looked at, and we do need to be realistic and ambitious in the future.
If I could have
I'd just like to reaffirm my views on that, which I previously expressed, that we do need to explore more opportunities, and we need to increase our capacity, I think, to bring in revenue for this council, for the future benefit of the council.
And I think, Convener, as well, in a private paper that we discussed in the subcommittee of this committee, we see officers working in that respect just recently. And that's exactly the type of thing that we need to see more of. And it's our role, obviously, as elected members to encourage officers to do that. I don't want to re-rehearse any of what we discussed at the Member Officer Working Group on the Central Production Unit. I'm very grateful to the Deputy Chief Executive for his clarification that when we discuss this at full council, we'll be discussing how we move forward in terms of providing school meals, and we'll have a look at a range of options and not just one. But I can't help be struck, as Councillor Waters was as well, that fully 5 months after this proposal came to the Education and Lifelong Learning Committee, all of the available measures are at risk. And I think, I would hope that, like me, you would consider this to be problematic, to say the least. Do you?
Thank you very much for your general question, Councillor Duggan. Yes, it is something that's given me some concern, and as you're aware, I asked for some more information on the project, and I am still awaiting more information coming forward, but it is a priority of mine to bring this to a resolution at the September meeting, and therefore move progress forward and hopefully alleviate the risks at that point. Sorry. The committee is asked to note the progress in relation to the projects monitored within our Transformation Programme 2015-2020. This paper details the continued work to complete the projects and realise the outcomes set out in the original document. I commend the report to you all. Do you have a seconder?
I formally second.
Happy to agree the report. Thank you. To bring the meeting to an end, thank you all very much for your contributions this morning.